Justin, what makes selling staffing services so challenging?
Yeah, I think that what is unique about selling in the staffing industry is that when you first approach your prospects, you're really considered a competitor. You know, it's not so much that you're having to get over an initial barrier into entry from a standpoint of them understanding your product or finding value in it or even servicing a need so much, but it's, you know, if you're selling directly into HR, for example, they oftentimes have their own talent acquisition. So there's kind of a guarded sort of nature that, hey, if I reach out to a staffing company or if I accept the assistance from a staffing company, is that a sign of weakness on the part of my team and our ability to fill our own positions? If they already do a lot of contract labor, then it's reasonable to assume that they already have embedded relationships and people that they're already working with. So if you're not directly a competitor of the group in talent acquisition, then you're a competitor to some of their favored relationships. And I think that's one of the things that makes it most challenging.
So how do we get around that, right? If we're a competitor at multiple levels, where do you propose that we get started?
Yeah, for sure. I think that I'll start by saying where you don't get started.
Perfect.
You know, I think that the tendency for a lot of staffing companies when they are prospecting for new clients is to either come in and to say, hey, give me your hardest rec, your hardest job order, and I'll work on it. I'll fill it. And to me, that kind of minimizes the value of your company. It minimizes your effectiveness, or they make it a price competition, right? So, hey, we'll do the first placement for 15%, or we'll give you a free placement, or you know, I've seen a million different things done just to kind of get in the door places, whether it's contract or direct hire staffing. I think that the whole idea, however you can accomplish it, is to turn that idea of competition into cooperation and collaboration. You've got to show that you're different in your prospecting and your messaging in everything you do, going through the process to show that you're detail oriented, that you do what you say you will do, that you have a high level of quality. And, you know, whether that's working through a sales cadence and just kind of knowledge sharing with things that you run across that's in the industry, statistics, things that are unique to them, news about ABC Corp that you've run across, whatever the case is, right? So it can be a lot of different things. But one thing that you don't want to do, I think, is undersell yourself to a point where there's a feeling of desperation, like, hey, just give us a shot to get in the door, right? There are a lot more effective ways, I think, to get there. One of the probably most successful methods that I ever used when I sold in staffing, and one that I taught to my teams, and one that it's certainly not a new concept. I think it's interesting to me that it's not talked about probably as publicly, but it's all through references. And so, for example, if you're recruiting on a role and you have a candidate that you're speaking with, and it's a quality candidate, let's go and get references from those candidates, right? A part of our process should be checking references before we submit people over. Well, if those are managerial references, what can those very easily turn into? Sales leads.
Yeah.
And so if you're having a conversation with someone and it's reasonable to assume that they're going to accept your call because it's a reference check, and it's important just to make it conversational at the end and say, you know, hey, Brad, listen, I really appreciate your time today. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't let you know that I work with candidates like Sally on a daily basis. Obviously, you think highly of her. She's of quality. You can see that I'm thorough in the way that I do my job. And it is like kind of a prove it scenario. You're doing the things that a lot of your competition doesn't, like checking references and being detail oriented. And you can very easily slip that into a sales type of conversation very softly and in a relationship type of way that is, you know, if you don't need us now, let's just stay in contact with one another. And I think that your goal over time is to show the quality of your methodology to enough people where it's like this invisible stack of names that builds up next to you that you can just put into a follow-up cadence. And at some point, it's kind of like an avalanche. There's enough momentum that starts to get going with that, where, you know, the goal is to get to a point where I don't really have to do any outbound calling because I've got so many people that said that they did find value in the way that I presented myself, and that they would use me if an opportunity came up. So,
yeah, one thing that I'm hearing there that's sort of a challenge for me is, what if the sales rep isn't doing those reference checks? How do you create a system within your team to make sure that one of your recruiters is sort of funneling those leads for your sales team? What do you recommend there?
Certainly. I've always made it a part of the KPIs. Okay. You have to make it really important within your organization. It has to be as important as a resume submission. It has to be as important as bringing in a job order. I've always kind of felt like if you had one really good recruiter and one really good candidate that's maybe had a few jobs in a market, you could start a branch in a market from that one relationship, right? Sure. So long as you have somebody that's going to be calling on those references and checking them. So when I've been with companies that have used that really impactfully and effectively, it's been a part of the KPIs. So, we're checking references. Recruiters bring in 10 references a week, 15 references a week, whatever the case is. And salespeople, account managers, it's their job to call on those. So maybe they make 15 reference calls a week, and that goes toward their total number of outbound calls or contacts or whatever the case is. So it's not only a pullout of their regular KPIs, but it also credits toward their, the normal things that we talk about all the time, calls, meetings, those kind of things. So I think it really is determinant upon the staffing company to make it something that's important, that it's visible, and that we're communicating to our teams like the true importance of that as a part of our process.
Another thing you mentioned there is sort of devaluing our services by inserting the line, just give us a chance. Hey, just give us a chance. Let me just work on this one order. Just give me a chance. And we had Tom Erb on the show a little while ago, and he said that is one of the things that he hears staffing firms say the most. For sure. And one of the things that he hates the most, and he got me thinking about it. I hear it quite a bit too, and I've now come to hate it. Just give us a chance devalues everything that we bring to the table. It shows that we almost don't have a fight in the game. We don't have a right to be working on that order. Just give me a chance is almost saying like, hey, if I get it done, I get it done. If not, whatever, no harm, no foul. Right. I like where you're going with that, because I agree. I think there's no value in doing that. Another thing that you had mentioned, and another reference here, Dan Morey was on the show recently, and I know you just spoke at the NISA Sales Summit. He had talked about how competing on price is just a race to the bottom. And you had just mentioned where that's really what we do. We try to come in and we try to compete on price. We beat ourselves up. We beat each other up, trying to get to the bottom, but it's really just a race to the bottom. And Justin, in your mind, it's coming up with a better system that gets around that talks about differentiation, that talks about your uniques, and brings that to the conversation instead.
You're absolutely right. I have seen what both Tom and Dan said, and they're 100% correct on those. And I love Dan's quote specifically about competing on price being a race toward the bottom, because it truly is. It's sort of a desperation tactic, but at the same time, you're not setting you or your team up for success, because those difficult to fill positions, they're difficult for a reason. Right. It's a purple squirrel rec. The salary's low. It's incredibly hard to find. They want a, Salesforce administrator that's going to work on site, and there are 3 of them in Omaha, Nebraska. So where are we going to find this person? So what ends up happening? You work this position. You've got recruiters on it potentially for weeks. Nobody's able to fill the position. You look like every other staffing company because you weren't able to fill it. And perhaps worse of all, you've kind of crushed the morality of your team, because you've kind of given an account manager or somebody that's working client side false hope, because yes, they did get a somewhat of a yes. Yeah, I'll give you an opportunity to work on this. It's not a real opportunity. You'll kind of have to get lucky to find success. But then from a recruiting standpoint, you've taken recruiters and spent their time on something that's been a real grind, and it's not going anywhere. So we've got to find ways that are better, that actually show differentiation, because there are plenty of staffing firms that are out there that will use that as a technique to kind of get in a foot in the door, but that's not really selling anything. And it's not really creating a set of promises upon which you can deliver to your prospect base, and that's the reason why I enjoyed going in and talking about, the way that we hire and onboard staff, the kind of tools that we use, the type of environment that we have, the way that we structure our sales cycle, the way that you can sell them into a process early on and determine whether or not that an end client is going to be a good business partner based on the fact of, do they respect the fact that you have a process?
Right.
If they don't, this is going to be a B or C client, but if they'll listen to you and actually find some value in a methodology that has some structure around it, then I think you've got an opportunity to have a real partnership in a situation like that. And too often, I think staffing companies are willing to take on any and all comers, right? They're super A-type personality.
Sure.
We're tough, we're the best, we can fill anything. You kind of, and the reality is that, you do have to take a step back and to vet things out more realistically. Yep. When I was early in my staffing career, and especially when I was carrying a bag as a salesperson, I would say yes to everything. And then got super frustrated when I would fill 1 out of 12 or 1 out of 15 jobs on my board, and ultimately realize, hey, I'm running hot all the time because I'm working on a bunch of stuff that's not worth working on.
Yeah.
And then you really start to, I think, narrow your lane a little bit and start to understand, what is the differentiation between a good client, maybe somebody that now's not the right time to work with them, a good job order versus one that, it's going to have a lower chance to fill. And all that's important to your team as well, because you don't want to burn people out. You want to give them real opportunities to fill positions and make money for themselves.
I would say in probably the last 150 to 200 calls, I can think of 4 clients who are struggling to find candidates. Everybody right now is struggling to close orders and struggling to find orders. And Justin, to your point, we get desperate in that kind of mode. We take any order we can because we need orders. How do you propose we have the courage to say no to an order when we're desperate for orders?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that the idea in mind here is to broaden your thought paradigm from a standpoint of the transactional order in, order out. In order to fill an order, I need an order. Well, no, what we need is conversation in the marketplace, right? This is where I go back to the whole idea of references that, hey, if I don't have a job on the board, but I'm looking for good business. Okay, so if I don't have jobs on the board, then that means that my recruiters have some spare time. Let's do some proactive recruiting and just do a ton of reference checks so that we can build a lot of those baseline relationships with people who have already seen the quality of our work, and just to continue to build that stack of names that's next to us. The reality is that if you're in a climate like things are now, there's still going to be good business out there, but you can't let your standards drop in terms of what you find to be a good job order or a bad job order, because a good job order in a good climate is the same thing as a good job order in a bad climate.
Right.
And a bad job order in a good climate is the same as a bad and a bad. So, I think that you have to, it takes a lot of kind of personal integrity, I think, to be able to say, hey, yeah, we're desperate for an order, but I'm looking at this and it's, the salary is 20K under, and they want somebody to work on site, and we've worked this type of position before, and we know that everybody in this market that's worth their salt, they're finding remote opportunities.
Yep.
I think that then you have to be in a position where you have a very difficult conversation about that and trying to influence the process. And I'm big on just total transparency. I've often felt like you can say pretty much anything that you want to say, as long as you go about it the right way and you say it the right way and you say it with the intent to partner. And so if I'm working with a hiring manager who gives me a super difficult to fill job order, but it is important to them, hey, I understand that this is important for you to fill for these reasons, but I've just got to be really transparent with you with the way that it's structured, with either the salary or the location or, whatever the case may be. It's not fillable, And so then I think you get an opportunity to test whether or not this is going to be somebody that can be collaborative with you, and to say, listen, if you can get me an extra 15K on the salary, then we might be able to help you with this, or whatever that extenuating factor is. And I think that is one of the things that a lot of staffing companies, especially newer sales reps, have a hard time with, is having difficult conversations and challenging people on a potential job order. And the reality is that the end prospects and the end clients a lot of times find a lot of value in the feedback that they get from you on jobs.
For sure.
They want that kind of feedback. If you're working on a ton of CPA positions or .NET developer positions or whatever it is, and you are brave enough to tell them, listen, we see this kind of position all the time. I've got 100 people on my bench right now, or people that I proactively recruit on, and I know everybody that's in this market that has a skill set. I'm telling you with 100% certainty, you're 15K below market. They'll find value in that. And then that's when you start to move from that competition to collaborator type of mindset.
Yeah, I love everything about that. I want to pivot direction here, just because I do want to get through some other talking points here from your presentation again at the NISA Sales Summit. You had mentioned 4 factors of a winning sales environment, and I don't believe that that's anything that we've talked about on Take the Stage before. We've talked quite a bit on lead generation and helping in the sales process, but we haven't talked about creating an actual winning sales environment. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the 4 factors of a winning sales environment.
Certainly. Absolutely. It is probably 10% original in thought, 90% not. And it is really based on the concept of the people, processes, and technology, the PPT framework that a lot of us are familiar with. Okay. And the only real piece I think that I added to that is forgotten about too often is having a cross-accountable culture. And what I mean by that is, yes, we've got to manage people. We have to hold them accountable. But we also have to hold ourselves accountable. We might be hiring great people. We might have a great process of hiring people and training them. We may have really good systems, which is another part of it. We may even have really good structure for our sales cycle that is set up in a very smart, structured type of way. But if we're not accountable to those people to, for example, maybe we have a salesperson that's working super hard, but we're not training them continually. We onboarded them correctly, but we're not giving them continual professional opportunities to grow. If we're not having one-on-ones, if we're not following up with the things that we said that we would do for them in order to, to help them along with a contract negotiation or whatever the case is, we have to be I think evaluatory of ourselves from a communication and accountability standpoint as well. When you start to share that as a leader from a top-down standpoint, you hold yourself accountable to that, then it becomes a fabric of your culture, and it starts to be something that everybody embodies. It starts to be a responsibility that is expected of everyone. And the best organizations that I've seen, the leaders in those organizations held themselves accountable and felt a real responsibility to enable success in other people. The other 3 factors, obviously, from a people standpoint, what are the things that we're really evaluating people on when we go through an interview process? There are a lot of things that, of course, everybody looks at. Have they been successful before? Do they know the industry? Do they have contacts? But I think that there are other things that we miss. Things like, are they still driven if they've been a great producer for 10 years? Are they still in it, or are they kind of over it? Do they have great EQ? They might have the highest IQ in the world, but if they can't empathize with prospects, then they're really not going to be that likable. And if you're not likable in staffing, nobody's going to buy from you. Nobody's going to work with you. Creating a really solid structure, a smart structure, as you might call it, with very specific and measurable goals and KPIs that really funnel down in a way where it eliminates some guesswork going through the process. It eliminates the guesswork for the recruiter to know what they're supposed to be doing, what their weekly goals are, what their daily goals are, what their monthly goals are. Yep. And then from a tools and systems standpoint, you can have an amazing culture with a ton of accountability. You can have great processes from a tactical standpoint going through a recruiting life cycle or a sales life cycle, and you can have great people that you've hired and trained and have a great group with you. But if you're running in archaic systems, then they're only going to be as good as the systems will allow them to be. Yeah. And one of the ways that I've always felt like to find out whether or not you're behind the curve on that is essentially, if your system is not a competitive advantage, it is a competitive disadvantage. There's no in between. And I would say the same thing about all that. If your hiring and onboarding is not a competitive advantage, it's a disadvantage. If your culture is not a competitive advantage, it's a disadvantage. Structure, all those kind of things. There's no in between in this space, or really in many spaces at all. So that's personally the way I look at things.
If your system isn't a competitive advantage, it is a competitive disadvantage. You might have gave us the soundbite of the show there, Justin. That's a really, really good one.
Right.
And
glad we got one.
Yeah, when I think about the industry as a stereotype, oftentimes I'd probably lean towards, most organizations are leaning toward it being a competitive disadvantage. Yeah. We're a little bit behind the times. We're a little bit set in our ways, but I will say the best companies that I'm talking to and working with are the ones who are thinking differently, who are on the other side of it, who are integrating things like AI and automation, who are looking at ways to be better, faster, stronger, who are saying, listen, just because we did it this way and we saw success back in 2022, we'll say even post-COVID, right? Just because we saw success 2 years ago and we did it this way doesn't mean we're going to see success doing it this way in 2025. I had probably a terrible call with a client who unfortunately is down about 70%. And come to find out, it's because the systems they're using and the processes they're using are the way we operated pre-COVID. And unfortunately, it's just a different world now. And if you're not willing to adapt and find new ways to do things, that's going to happen. And it's a scary and sad realization. But Justin, to your point, if the software isn't a competitive advantage, it is a competitive disadvantage. And I fully believe that and support that as well.
Yeah, and I would say that with really everything that you could think of from a standpoint of the structure of a company in this space. I would say that from a marketing standpoint, marketing is kind of one of those things to me that it's just so important, because a lot of staffing companies just aren't doing it because, hey, we've got a sales team and we make 500 cold calls a week, and maybe we're doing the reference checks and everything else. So why do we need to market? I know of staffing firms who have put a lot of time and effort into their marketing and create a system where I'm getting 10 inbound leads every week. That's like 3 salespeople. Yeah. So, but there was a plan. It wasn't, let's try a marketing activity, or let's try a sales activity, or let's try a tool. It was, let's have a plan for all of these things, truly evaluate what we're doing in each of these areas, test it, measure it, and then make a determination whether we stay the course or shift course based on the information that we have in hand. So I think that a lot of it is just moving and acting with intention, and then paying attention to what you're doing and measuring things, and then adjusting where you need to.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. Outside to Take the Stage on our show Insights, where we talk about what's working in digital and recruitment marketing, Matt Lozar and I talk all the time about how you can't just have marketing tactic. You need strategy, you need plan, you need to understand what the overall goal is. And I often paint the roadmap analogy. If you don't know where your destination is, and your family just gets in a car, and your cousins and everybody else just gets in a car, you're not all going to end up at the same place, right? You need to know that end destination, and then you need to reverse engineer how you're going to get there through strategy, through tactics. And I feel often throughout our industry, we might deploy a tactic, TikTok, super hot right now. So everyone's thinking, oh, what do I do over there? That's not really the focus. The focus is you need job orders. That's the goal.
Yes.
Then reverse engineer it and think about it. Don't chase the new shiny object. Think goal and then go backwards from there. But this is not a marketing conversation. This is a sales conversation, my friend.
Yeah. Good
Justin,
deal.
I want to talk briefly while I still have you here. You had talked about, again, in your presentation at the NISA Sales Summit, about how to establish a proper sales cadence. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that if you have a few minutes here still to talk about how to develop that proper sales cadence. Because, again, stereotyping a lot of the organizations that I have the opportunity to speak with, I'm not sure there's a full process in place. And I'd love to get your thoughts on how we can deploy that maybe 30-day cadence, what that might look like, 60-day cadence, whatever you have in mind. But enlighten us, walk us through what maybe that ideal sales cadence would look like.
Yeah, great question. I think that, I'll talk more, I guess, about the elements of it, because the reality is you can do it a lot of different ways. So you can take some of these factors and then plug and play and test, like I was mentioning, how you see fit, because sales cadences are sort of funny. I've seen something work great for 2 months, and then all of a sudden, because we're measuring its effectiveness, the numbers may drop, and you say, okay, let's pivot. And you make a couple tweaks, and then your analytics go back up, and that works for a while. And, you have to consistently test and kind of measure cadences. So I think it's important to understand the elements of a good cadence. I would say that from a standpoint of length of a cadence, it's important to understand how many outreaches it typically takes to get someone interested. And those numbers vary. Sure. Anywhere from 8 to 15 to maybe even 20 sometimes, depending on what you're reading and who you're listening to. But let's say, as a general number, it takes 12 to 15 touches. So that's the amount of outreach points that we should have in our cadence. It should be 12 to 15 steps. With that being said, it's 2024 and people could be anywhere at any one point. People say cold calling's dead. It's not dead. But also, cold email still works. LinkedIn prospecting still works. The point is that they all work, but you don't know where the prospect is going to be, when they're going to be available at any one of these points. So you need a 12 to 15 touch point cadence that includes multiple factors: outbound calling, cold emailing, LinkedIn, handwritten letters. That's something that Tom Erb has talked about now for years.
Handwritten note, and nothing stops you in your tracks like a handwritten note. That you didn't have to do that for me. That feeling that comes with a handwritten note. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I can't speak more highly of a handwritten note. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's, you'll hear people say things like, well, nobody does that anymore. That's why you do it.
Exactly.
That's why you do it, right?
Yeah.
And, I even would put things like a reference check in maybe a sales cadence if you prefer to do something like that. You can literally target, if you're trying to get into ABC company, okay, let me find a bunch of people that used to work there, recruit them, proactively recruit them, find references, and see if we can find managers that still work there. Yeah. I'm directly calling into this place now, and I'm targeting this company. And so you can include those kind of things in your cadence. I think that up front in a cadence, you want to kind of front load the activity. In other words, you might go a little heavier in terms of, we've got maybe a call and an email and on day one. On day two, we're adding them on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Day three, maybe another call and an email. Then it starts to space out a little. Right. Okay. We want them to get used to seeing our name. We want them to get used to seeing our branding. And that's why you front load it a bit. After the first 4 or 5 days, I'm not a huge fan of going back to back days with activity. I'll typically leave a day, but also you never want to repeat the same type of activity back to back. So if one step in a cadence was an email, the next one's going to be a call, or it's going to be a handwritten letter, or it's going to be LinkedIn. They should all also not be salesy. Some of them should just be providing information, something that is relevant to them, that's maybe marketplace information or whatever the case may be. So I think that type of variety is really important to include in a sales cadence. If you get to the end of it and it's like there's been no movement, aside from the obvious conclusion that, hey, this cadence didn't work for them, I do think that you've got to get to a point where it's not just, okay, well, this person's done and it didn't work. Put them into a secondary cadence, perhaps a nurture cadence that hits them once every other week. That's just really soft, sends them information on the market, something that you update fairly frequently with relevant news, information that came out, whatever the case is, anything that is perhaps about their company, things that congratulate them, maybe there are a lot of different ways that you can go with that, but it's a little softer and it's just more of a true nurture cadence that is meant to be longer term. And then after a couple months have passed, perhaps maybe you put them back in a regular sales cadence that you've adjusted and sort of work them through that, right? So we're never really giving up. We ultimately want to drive every prospect that we have to either find out if they are a candidate for consideration for us or not. But you certainly don't want to end a cadence and then not have something to do. So the final step in every cadence should be act and make some sort of positive affirmative motion to either get somebody in another cadence or whatever the case is. So that's super high level in terms of the way that we structure those. The content is a completely different piece of it. Chat GPT is a great source of information. Obviously, when it comes to crafting emails and to crafting messaging, we leverage that a lot. I think a lot of companies do now, obviously. But so, and there are experts far better than I to kind of go through the content piece of it. But that's generally how we structure things.
Yeah, the sales cadence part, I really like, and my wheels are turning. And friends, then what you might even do on top of that is add in layers of marketing, right? So maybe you add on pay-per-click advertising so that you're now surrounding your prospects as they navigate throughout the internet, whether it's in Google's advertising network or on sites like Facebook or Instagram. You're living in their world, so they're seeing you in other ways. Maybe you're layering in other elements like IP tracking. So if they come back to your website. I cannot speak more highly of IP tracking lately, right? You're prospecting, you're reaching out to all of these individuals. They're probably doing their due diligence and looking at your website, but they're not filling out a contact form because they're window shopping. We have IP tracking on the website. We know that Justin was on the site yesterday. Your cadence is working. It's at least triggering something and their wheels are turning. So we have that information. But again, if you don't have that on your site, you don't know that information and you just assume, it's not working. It's not, Justin isn't following up, but we need that information.
Absolutely.
Critical.
Yeah. And that's where the tooling piece of it comes into play, that we've got to have some way to manage the effectiveness of whatever it is that we're doing. And we have to measure it beyond, I sent 100 emails and got 3 meetings, so I've got a 3% capture rate. There are so many other potential outcomes, amount of clicks, amount of people that maybe abandon a landing page or whatever the case is, that we've got to be using information that can capture as much of that data that comes through to enable us to make future decisions.
Love it. He's Justin Uselton. Justin, before we get to the rapid fire round, anything from me?
No, I mean, Haley Marketing is a great company. I mean, we've been partners with you guys for a long time and just really pleased to have an opportunity to come on here and to talk shop with you.
Yeah. And I apologize. Actually, why don't you walk us through Avionte and let us know what you do there? I'll give you the floor to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my role is as one of the sales directors at Avionte on the client acquisition side. And so Avionte, if you're not familiar with us, we're a true end-to-end supplier of staffing software technology, everything from the VMS side to the CRM ATS, mobile technology, and really allows you as a staffing company to go essentially rec to check going out to your talent on one singular platform and one true source of truth. So we've been in business now for around 20 years, and I've been with the company now for a little over a year and a half. So Avionte is a great place, and we're doing some big things. So
excellent. Well, Justin, let's get to the rapid fire round.
Here we go. All
right. One book that has fundamentally changed your life.
I'm going back in time like 70 years probably, but if you've ever heard of Earl Nightingale, the Strangest Secret, it's it's like partially philosophy, partially business. He was a contemporary of Napoleon Hill, and so he's got a lot of interesting information that is, I originally read the book, and then the audio book's great because the guy was an amazing presenter, and he actually did audio on the book. I want to say like back in the 70s when it was kind of rare to do that sort of thing. But yes, it's about business, but it's also, I think, about just kind of manifesting success for yourself, not only professionally, but personally with the relationships that you have. And I don't pretend to be smart enough to understand why it works, but if you envision certain things in your life and then act on that, you tend to be pretty pleased with the results. So, not to go, too much in kind of the philosophical realm, but it's something that, people talk about all day in terms of just determining what your reality is going to be like and controlling what you can control. And, one of the big quotes out of the book is that, you become what you think about all day long. And I've always believed that. And it's a phenomenal work if people haven't read it out there.
Have not read it, but I know he did the audio book, I guess you would call it at the time, for Think and Grow Rich, which is one of my absolute favorite books. I read it once or twice a year. And actually, it's a heavy listen for me when I'm on a treadmill. If I feel like if I'm losing my way, I'll put on one or so chapters and then try to reframe where I'm at in my day or my week. But yeah, his version of Think and Grow Rich that he read, I guess you would call it an audiobook. I don't know exactly when that was recorded, but it is an audiobook. Great answer. One conversation with anybody, living or dead, who are you going to sit down with?
Oh, this one's loaded. I know before we started, we talked about music a bit.
Sure.
I'm a fan of old guitar guys, so I'd probably have to go with somebody interesting, like a Jimi Hendrix or somebody like that. Maybe a John Lennon.
Good one. Very good answer. Very, very good answer.
How about yourself?
If I got to sit down, I got two sides of that. So one, I lost two of my uncles very early in my life. So I would sit down with them. I have quit drinking in the last year and a half, but I would love to sit down and have a rum and Coke with both of those guys one more time and just talk to them for a half hour.
Yeah.
On the alive side, Simon Sinek is going to be my answer today. Okay.
I don't think I addressed an alive side. Man, that one's tough. I guess I just listen to music by dead people. I don't know. So come back to me on that one.
I will. I love that question though, because and why we ask these questions on Take the Stage, I have yet to get a duplicate answer, which is so great about the show and is really building a really cool database of just things from throughout the industry that people want to talk about or read. Last one. Sure. One piece of advice that you would give to somebody just starting in staffing and recruiting. What are you going to tell them?
That's such a great question because it's such a multi-functional job from a standpoint of all the things that you have to do and so many different tactical pieces and strategic pieces. And at the end of the day, if you just help people, you'll do really well. If your singular focus and everything you do is to help someone, then you're going to crush it. You're going to be great. Yep. Whether it's you eventually go into leadership or whether you progress in recruitment or if you're on the client side and you move up in sales, if you just stay focused on helping people, and that's not just on the candidate side also. I mean, sometimes you forget that the person that is giving you an opportunity on a job order, like that's their job too. And there's a reason why they have to get this filled and you're helping them by doing that. And you have that belief that you really can help people, then you truly value what you do. And anytime you're sort of caught in a lurch in terms of, hey, how do I make a decision on what to do or where to spend my time or whatever the case is, if you just kind of go back to that central piece of help somebody, how can I help the person that's in question here? How can I help the person on this phone screen? How can I help someone in this meeting? Then that's going to be a pretty good North Star for you throughout your entire career.
He's Justin Uselton, the Director of Sales with Avionte. Justin, can't thank you enough for coming on the show and taking the stage with me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad.